Something terrifying is quietly unfolding at Silverstone. No bold press releases. No overhyped launches. Just a name AMR26. And one man behind it, Adrian Newey, the most successful designer in F1 history, has walked into a factory with unlimited budget, no design legacy, and a brand new rulebook for 2026. And the result? Isn't just a car. It's a radical concept. A ground-up weapon designed in near-total silence. But here's what no one is saying yet. The engine may be a liability. The systems might be untested. But if Newey's philosophy is baked into this machine, this could be the single most disruptive F1 car since the 2009 Brawn. And we're only seeing the tip of it. Officially, this is just another pre-season build-up. A new chassis. A new power unit. A new year. But unofficially, every team on the grid knows something's changed at Aston Martin. Because this isn't the same team that overperformed in 2023, or faded into the midfield in 2024. This is Aston Martin with Adrian Newey. And that means the rules of engagement are about to shift. For the first time in their short F1 journey, Aston Martin isn't borrowing parts, repurposing aero concepts, or adapting to someone else's engine map. They're building from zero. Their own car. Their own power unit. Their own interpretation of the 2026 regulations. And guiding that interpretation? The most successful technical mind the sport has ever seen. But here's what's most unsettling. There hasn't been a single technical deep dive. No breakdown of aero concepts. No explainer from the team on what makes this car special. Because they don't need to explain it. They already know the paddock is watching. And guessing. That's the real context. This car hasn't been launched yet. And still, every team principal, every technical director, is asking the same question. What has Newey actually built? Because they're not just expecting innovation. They're expecting something disruptive. And the silence from Aston Martin? It isn't hesitation. It's intentional. We still haven't seen the car in full. No complete renders. No track shakedown. No launch livery. Just fragments, leaked sketches, tightly cropped teasers, whispers from engineers. But even those fragments tell a story. Because if you know what to look for, you can already spot the Newey signature. The nose section narrow, contoured, sharp. The front suspension angled for air channeling, not mechanical ease. And then there's the cooling layout. What little we've seen suggests radical compression. No bulging inlets. No oversized bodywork for battery thermal protection. Nothing that looks like compromise. And that's what's turning heads in technical rooms across the grid. Because the 2026 rules are brutal. You're juggling reduced drag, increased reliance on electric power, and strict limits on active aero and energy recovery. Every other team is designing for compliance. But Aston Martin? They look like they're designing for control. Control of airflow. Control of energy deployment. Control of the car's balance under conditions where control should be breaking down. And that's exactly the Adrian Newey philosophy. He doesn't just chase peak performance. He designs cars that stay fast when the systems around them begin to fail. That's what makes the AMR26 so unsettling already. Because if the car can hold together at the edge of thermal instability, if it can predict and preempt the trade-offs that every other car is struggling to manage, then it's not just fast. It's strategically untouchable. And the worst part? We've only seen a glimpse. The more you study the 2026 rulebook, the more you realize something unsettling. The FIA has tried to control performance, without fully understanding how performance will be created. Drag reduction limits, battery deployment ratios, standardized active aero, even energy recovery caps. All of it tight, technical, complex. But that complexity has created gaps. Loopholes? No. Blind spots. And that's exactly where Adrian Newey operates best. While the FIA has focused on restricting tools, Newey has turned his attention to the interactions. Because the real performance in 2026 won't come from peak downforce or straight-line power. It'll come from systems that behave in ways the rulebook doesn't anticipate. Thermal behavior. Predictive energy balancing. Software-controlled aero states that never trigger the sensor thresholds. It's not illegal. It's not even hidden. It's just undefined. And that's the twist. Aston Martin may have designed a car that's technically compliant, but philosophically incompatible with the spirit of the regulations. They're not asking, how do we fit into these rules? They're asking, where do the rules stop talking? And they're building in that silence. Because Newey doesn't care about fitting into the expected performance curves. He's playing in the margins. Designing a car that thinks ahead, adapts, avoids stress before it occurs. You can't ban that. Because you can't define what hasn't happened yet. And if Aston Martin's 2026 car is built on that premise, then it may already be too late for the others. Not because the car is unbeatable, but because it's playing a different game. This is where it gets strange. Not because of what Aston Martin is saying, but because of what no one else is. Usually, when a team shows even the hint of a radical idea, the paddock reacts immediately. Think DAS. Think the double diffuser. Think Ferrari's fuel flow tricks in 2019. In each of those cases, rivals mobilized instantly. Pressure was put on the FIA. Clarifications were demanded. Loopholes were closed. But now? Silence. No technical complaints. No public suspicions. Just tension. Because the teams can feel it. They know when a concept doesn't follow normal patterns. They've seen enough wind tunnel projections, simulator data, and flow models to sense it, even if they don't understand it yet. And that's the issue. No one understands what Aston Martin has actually done. There's no single innovation to attack. No one component to target. What's emerging feels more like a philosophy, a car designed around flow, feedback, and anticipation. And those kinds of systems? They don't show up clearly in telemetry. They don't trigger rule breaches. They just perform better quietly, efficiently, and consistently. That's why rivals are nervous. Not because Aston Martin is suddenly miles ahead, but because they might be ahead without anyone knowing how. And you can't counter something you don't understand. You can't replicate it if it doesn't follow your logic. And worst of all, you can't protest it, because it isn't illegal. This isn't about legality anymore. It's about timing. Aston Martin may not have built the fastest car out of the box. But if the rest of the grid takes 6 months to figure out what they're even looking at, that's 6 months too late. If this car works, if the AMR26 delivers even half of what the data suggests, then the grid is in serious trouble. Not because Aston Martin will dominate from race 1. They might not. In fact, it's possible the car takes time to hit its stride. Integration at this level often requires real-world adaptation. But here's the problem. Even a slow start could be enough. Because if the concept proves stable, if the feedback loop between hardware, software, and driver behavior holds together, then Aston Martin won't be improving at a normal rate. They'll be accelerating exponentially. And once that curve takes off, the others won't be able to match it. Not because they aren't smart. Not because they don't have resources. But because they're still solving problems this car may have never needed to solve. Mercedes might realize their aero targets are built around the wrong flow assumptions. Red Bull could find that their energy mapping is too reactive, too dependent on driver input. Ferrari might discover that their cooling strategy costs more performance than it saves. And while they're patching their foundations, Aston Martin will be iterating on version 2 of a concept no one else truly understands. But this goes deeper than performance. Because if the AMR26 works, it will legitimize Aston Martin as more than a disruptor. It will make them a structural threat. Teams may be forced to reorganize their internal structures, hire new aerodynamicists, rebuild their simulation logic, rethink their relationship with engine suppliers who now look like they're trailing. And that's where the pressure hits the FIA. Because if one team has built a car so cleverly that it reshapes the logic of the regulations, the governing body faces a brutal decision. Let it play out? Or intervene? Because once a concept like this proves itself, it doesn't just change the pecking order. It changes the entire framework of how teams think about car design. And some teams? They may never catch up. The truth is we still don't know what Aston Martin has built. Not really. We have sketches, statements, subtle clues buried in simulations and design language. But the full concept? It's still hidden. And maybe that's the scariest part. Because if this car doesn't deliver, we'll chalk it up to ambition. We'll say they reached too far, too soon. But if it does work, it will expose something far more uncomfortable. That the rulebook isn't broken. It's just incomplete. And Adrian Newey may have found what every team fears. A legal, functional path around the current logic of Formula One design. If that's true, then 2026 won't just be a reset year. It'll be a dividing line. Between teams that built for regulation, and one team that built for the gaps between them. What happens next? Well, that depends. On how the car behaves under pressure. On how much the FIA understands and how quickly. And on how the rest of the grid reacts when they realize they've been chasing the wrong target. Because this story isn't over. It hasn't even begun. February 9th may be the first time we see the AMR26. But the real launch? Will happen on track. When the other teams finally understand, they're not just racing a car. They're racing a concept. And that concept could change everything.